The year is 1942. You're thousands of feet above the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The roar of your engine is a constant companion, a fragile promise of life in a sky filled with death. Below, the shimmering surface offers no escape. Above, a shadow falls. Not a cloud, but a squadron of enemy aircraft, faster, more agile, and hungry. You're outnumbered. Your fuel gauge plunges with relentless certainty. Your plane, an American steel bird, is sturdy, a marvel of engineering, but it's heavier, slower, less nimble than the enemy's sleek, deadly interceptors. This was the brutal reality for naval aviators in the early days of the Pacific War. A grim equation played out day after day. American bravery versus enemy engineering superiority. Our pilots were among the finest, their courage boundless, but courage alone couldn't defy the laws of aerodynamics. They were dying at an alarming, unsustainable rate. In the chaotic ballet of an aerial dogfight, altitude was everything. Speed was survival. And in both these critical aspects, our valiant pilots often found themselves at a crushing disadvantage. The enemy's fighters could climb like rockets, turn on a dime, leaving our pilots struggling, often fatally. The statistics were a blood-soaked ledger. For every 2 enemy planes shot down, we lost one of our own. A kill ratio that bled our forces dry, one brave soul at a time. The finest minds, the most decorated engineers, the seasoned admirals, they all grappled with this impossible problem. They poured resources, redesigned aircraft, tweaked every measurable parameter. Their conclusion was grim, unwavering. These are the limits of physics. You cannot extract more power. You cannot climb faster. It is simply impossible. But what if impossible was just a word? What if the solution wasn't hidden in complex calculations or advanced degrees, but in the quiet, intuitive understanding of a man who worked with his hands? A man who saw a fleeting anomaly, a whisper of potential where others saw only a momentary glitch. A man who dared to defy every rule, every expert, every warning, to test a theory that could rewrite the rules of aerial combat and save countless lives. This is the story of that man, a story of intuition triumphing over dogma, of courage challenging consensus, and of an unthinkable breakthrough that emerged from the most unexpected place imaginable, flipping the entire Pacific Air War on its head. This isn't just military history. It's a blueprint for anyone who's ever been told, "You can't do that." Stick with us, because what happened next is an electrifying testament to the power of questioning everything. The crushing reality, the fight for the skies. In the crucible of early 1942, the Pacific Theater was a relentless grinder of men and machines. The imperial forces of Japan, with their formidable A-6M fighters, colloquially known as Zeros, held a terrifying advantage in the skies. American naval aviators, flying the robust but comparatively sluggish F-4F Wildcat, faced a stark, often fatal reality. Imagine the scene. A lone American pilot, his fuel gauge dipping towards empty, 6 predatory silhouettes carving ominous circles above him. His wingman, crippled by a malfunction, has already retreated. He is utterly alone, 6-1, his aircraft already compromised, precious fuel spewing from a ruptured tank. The enemy fighters climb effortlessly, gaining an altitude advantage that in the next minute will become a death sentence. In 5 minutes, his engines will starve, forcing him to ditch into the shark-infested abyss below. This wasn't an isolated nightmare. It was a daily occurrence. The numbers painted a devastating portrait. From the end of 1941 to mid-1942, American fighters barely managed to shoot down 1.5 enemy planes for every one of ours lost. The Zero could outclimb our aircraft by 1,000 feet per minute. It outturned them by a crucial 30 degrees, giving it a lethal edge in the close-quarter swirling chaos of a dogfight. Pilots were falling from the sky at an alarming rate. The Battle of the Coral Sea alone saw 66 of our aircraft vanish in just 2 days. At Midway, a pivotal engagement, 41 American pilots never returned to their carriers. The issue wasn't a lack of heroism. Our naval aviators possessed unparalleled bravery, warriors forged in fire. The problem was fundamentally one of physics, of engineering. Our Grumman fighters, while rugged and capable of absorbing incredible damage, were heavier, slower, and undeniably less nimble than the Japanese Zeros. They were a testament to brute force, designed to withstand punishment, but lacking the critical agility needed to dominate aerial duels. The brute force fix, a new weapon, old problems. 18 months into the war, a new American fighter rolled off the assembly lines, the F-6F Hellcat. It was the Navy's direct answer to the Zero problem, a bigger, more powerful beast packing a colossal 2,000 horsepower engine. On paper, it was a game-changer, designed to overpower the enemy. It had more armor, more firepower. It was built for resilience. Yet, in early combat trials over the Solomon Islands, a crushing reality emerged. The Hellcat, while impressive, still couldn't overcome the Zero's most critical advantage: its initial climb rate. The Hellcat ascended at a respectable 2,800 feet per minute at sea level, but the Zero still climbed faster in those crucial low-altitude seconds of combat. And in a dogfight, the first 30 seconds of a climb could determine who lived and who died. It meant the difference between gaining the critical high ground and being caught in the enemy's sights. The Navy's most brilliant engineers attacked the problem with conventional solutions. They tried to shave weight by reducing armor plating, a move met with furious protests from the pilots who relied on that protection. They experimented with different propeller pitch settings, yielding only marginal improvements. They adjusted supercharger boost pressure, squeezing out perhaps an extra 200 feet per minute in climb rate. Still not enough to match the nimble Zero. The Hellcat, while powerful, remained a brute force solution to an elegance problem. It won through durability and sheer destructive power, not through superior agility or initial climb performance. By late 1943, the consensus among the experts was bleak. A senior commander, leading all land-based aircraft in the South Pacific, issued a directive: Hellcat pilots must avoid low-altitude turning fights. They were instructed to use their superior speed and diving ability to make slashing attacks from above, then disengage. Never get slow, never try to outclimb a Zero in the first critical seconds of combat. The message was clear. The laws of thermodynamics and aerodynamics were immutable. You could not wring more power from an engine without a complete redesign, and that simply wasn't an option in the midst of a global war. The stakes: pilots still falling. Despite the introduction of the Hellcat, American pilots continued to perish. In September 1943 alone, over 117 aircraft were lost above a heavily fortified enemy stronghold. The enemy had concentrated hundreds of fighters, mercilessly ambushing American strike packages. While the Hellcat was starting to win the overall air war through sheer numbers and superior pilot training, individual dogfights remained perilously deadly. When a Hellcat pilot made a mistake, got slow, or found himself at a disadvantage in a climb, the Zero pounced. The kill ratio was slowly improving, but at an unbearable cost. For every 5 enemy aircraft shot down, 1 American pilot died. With invasion after invasion planned across the Pacific, these grim numbers promised thousands more fallen aviators by war's end. The Navy desperately needed every conceivable advantage. The lives of thousands of young men hung in the balance. Enter the unseen genius, the mechanic. Now, amidst this confluence of overwhelming technical challenges and crushing human cost, steps forward a man who, by all conventional measures, should have been utterly insignificant. Born in 1919 in the quiet, unassuming farmlands of rural Pennsylvania, this individual barely scraped through high school. His formal education ended there. Before joining the Navy in 1938, he worked as a mechanic in a bustling city garage, coaxing sputtering Fords and recalcitrant Chevrolets back to life. He possessed no engineering degree, no college education, no prestigious credentials. What he possessed, however, was something far rarer, an intuitive, almost spiritual understanding of engines. Years of getting his hands dirty, listening to their intricate rhythms, diagnosing their mechanical maladies, this was his true education. By 1943, he was a test pilot at a naval air station, evaluating new aircraft before they were unleashed into the brutal cauldron of combat. The Whispering Engine, a Forbidden Insight. It was October 7, 1943, while testing a Hellcat, that this unassuming mechanic noticed something peculiar. During a high-speed recovery from a dive, the engine, for a fleeting moment, seemed to produce an abnormal surge of power. The tachometer needle flickered, jumping just slightly. The aircraft momentarily leaped forward with an unexpected burst of acceleration. Then, just as quickly, everything returned to normal. Most pilots, seasoned by countless hours in the cockpit, would have dismissed this momentary anomaly. A glitch, a blip, a figment of imagination. But not this man. He was captivated, obsessed by the fleeting whisper of extra power. That night, driven by an unshakable curiosity, he delved into maintenance records. What he unearthed was fascinating. The fuel mixture control, a critical lever in every cockpit, had been accidentally nudged into the auto-rich setting during that specific dive. This meant the engine had been momentarily flooded with far more fuel than the standard cruise setting allowed. Standard operating procedure, the sacred text for every naval aviator, mandated the use of auto-lean mixture during level flight and climbs. This conserved precious fuel and, crucially, protected the engine from overheating and damage. Auto-rich was a setting reserved only for short bursts, takeoff, or desperate emergency combat situations, never to be sustained for more than 5 minutes. The engine manufacturer's technical manual was absolutely explicit. Extended operation at auto-rich would cause cylinders to overheat, foul spark plugs, and inevitably lead to catastrophic engine failure. Every pilot learned this in flight school. It was gospel. It was the law. But the mechanic couldn't shake that surge of power. He knew from years of intimate familiarity that the R2800 engine was massively overbuilt, designed with an immense cooling capacity, far exceeding its advertised limits. He harbored a growing suspicion. Perhaps the manufacturer's warnings were overly conservative, designed more to protect against legal liability than to represent the true mechanical limits of the engine. What if, just what if, you could run auto-rich for longer than 5 minutes? What if you could run it for an entire combat mission? The extra fuel, he theorized, wouldn't just enrich the mixture for more power. It would also act as an internal coolant, keeping the cylinders from overheating. The engine could then produce its absolute maximum power, continuously. The Hellcat could climb like never before. It was a crazy idea. It violated every regulation. It flew in the face of decades of established wisdom. But the mechanic couldn't let it go. The sacred texts, manuals, and the dogma of expertise. The story of the mechanic's discovery isn't just about an engine setting. It's a profound examination of the inertia of established knowledge and the inherent resistance to anything that challenges it. In the military, perhaps more than anywhere else, operating manuals and manufacturer specifications aren't just guidelines. They are the accumulated wisdom of countless hours of research, testing, and, tragically, sometimes combat experience. These documents are meticulously crafted by legions of engineers, signed off by committees of experts, and then distilled into doctrine that pilots are trained to follow without question. Imagine the sheer weight of authority behind these rules. An engine manufacturer like Pratt & Whitney employs hundreds, if not thousands, of brilliant engineers. These are individuals with advanced degrees, years of specialized training, and intimate knowledge of every nut, bolt, and calculation that goes into designing a complex piece of machinery like the R2800 engine. Their warnings about auto-rich operation were not arbitrary. They were based on extensive bench tests, simulations, and an understanding of the material stresses, thermal limits, and long-term wear patterns. For a young pilot, especially one with only a high school education, to question this collective, peer-reviewed, and thoroughly vetted expertise was not just audacious, it was borderline sacrilege. It was like a first-year medical student telling a team of world-renowned surgeons that their operating procedure for a complex heart transplant was wrong. The immediate reaction isn't just disagreement, it's incredulity, dismissal, and often thinly veiled contempt. The gatekeepers of knowledge, experts, and their echo chamber. Beyond the written rules, there's the human element, the gatekeepers of knowledge. These are the senior officers, the seasoned test pilots, the technical advisors. Their careers are built on understanding and enforcing these established norms. Their very identity is often tied to their expertise. When an outsider, particularly one without formal credentials, challenges this foundation, it's not just an intellectual debate, it can feel like a personal attack on their competence and years of experience. The military, by its very nature, thrives on order, discipline, and adherence to procedure. These are essential for coordinated action and safety, especially in high-risk environments like aviation. Innovation is often encouraged, but typically within established frameworks and through official channels. An individual conducting unauthorized tests and deliberately violating manufacturer specifications is not seen as an innovator. They are seen as a rogue element, a potential liability, and a danger to themselves and others. This rigid structure, while vital for operations, can also inadvertently create an echo chamber, where dissenting ideas struggle to be heard, let alone accepted. Fear, liability, and the cost of conformity. There are also practical, often unspoken, reasons for the fierce adherence to conservative operating limits. Fear of failure, fear of catastrophic loss of equipment, and, perhaps most significantly, fear of liability. In peacetime, an engine failure due to unauthorized operation would open a Pandora's box of investigations, court-martials, and lawsuits. Manufacturer warranties would be voided. Careers would be ruined. These are powerful disincentives to experimentation, driving a culture of caution that, while rational in a civilian context, can become a deadly impediment in the crucible of war. The price of conformity in this specific instance was tragically high. Pilots were dying. For every 5 enemy planes shot down, an American aviator paid the ultimate price. Thousands more were projected to fall. The irony was profound. The very rules designed to ensure safety and equipment longevity were, in a wartime context, inadvertently contributing to the loss of life by preventing the discovery of a critical combat advantage. This adherence to what was known, to what was safe according to peacetime metrics, meant a continued acceptance of a fundamental inferiority in the most critical moments of aerial combat. It underscored a painful truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous path is the one that seems safest, because it prevents us from finding the true solution. The lone experimenter, defying the rules. The mechanic knew what he had to do, but he also knew the answer he'd get if he asked for permission. So he didn't ask. Instead, on October 14, 1943, he calmly signed out a Hellcat for what appeared to be a routine test flight. Once airborne and safely away from the watchful eyes of the airfield, he made his move. He nudged the mixture control to auto-rich and unleashed the throttle to maximum power. The engine responded with an unprecedented roar, a thunderous surge that propelled the aircraft forward with an unfamiliar, exhilarating force. He held the climb, his gaze fixed on the instruments. Cylinder head temperatures began to rise, but critically, they remained within acceptable limits. Oil pressure held steady. The engine, though guzzling fuel at an alarming rate, didn't falter. For 10 agonizing minutes, he sustained this full-power, auto-rich climb. When he finally leveled off at 18,000 feet, his hands were trembling. He had climbed at an astonishing 3,400 feet per minute. This was 400 feet per minute faster than any Hellcat had ever achieved in official tests. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a revolution. He landed with his fuel tanks nearly depleted, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against his ribs. He had just violated a litany of Navy regulations. He risked a court-martial, his career, everything. But he had also discovered something that could turn the tide of a brutal war and save countless lives. The mechanic's validation, proof in the hardware. After landing, the mechanic didn't just walk away. He taxied to a secluded hardstand, shut down the engine, and waited 30 minutes for the metal to cool. Then, with a mixture of dread and anticipation, he popped the cowling open. He was terrified of what he might find: cracked cylinders, burned valves, telltale signs of catastrophic damage. Instead, the engine looked remarkably healthy. The spark plugs showed minor fouling from the richer mixture, but nothing serious, nothing that couldn't be easily addressed. The cooling system, as he had intuitively suspected, had handled the increased heat load with surprising efficiency. The robust R2800 engine was, indeed, tougher than the manufacturer's conservative lawyers and engineers had implied. Over the next week, he embarked on 6 more unauthorized test flights. He meticulously varied his technique, experimenting with different mixture settings and throttle positions. He discovered that the maximum climb advantage without excessive fuel consumption was achieved by running auto-rich below 10,000 feet. Above that altitude, the thinner air reduced the benefit. He filled a notebook with precise handwritten data, climb rates, fuel consumption figures, engine temperatures. By October 22, 1943, he had irrefutable proof that his forbidden technique worked. Now came the truly daunting challenge: convincing the Navy. The brick wall of bureaucracy, that is illegal. The mechanic's commanding officer, a stern and by-the-book leader, listened to the proposal for precisely 90 seconds. Then he cut the mechanic off, his voice sharp with reprimand. "That is illegal, Lieutenant. You are describing a direct violation of manufacturer specifications and Navy operating procedures. If you've been flying that way, you've been damaging government property and risking your life unnecessarily." The mechanic attempted to present his meticulously compiled data, but the commanding officer wouldn't even glance at it. "Pratt & Whitney employs hundreds of engineers," he lectured. "They designed that engine. They wrote those specifications for a reason. You're a test pilot, not an engine designer. This conversation is over." But the mechanic was undeterred. He knew what he had discovered. He knew it worked. And he knew that American pilots were dying in the Pacific while the Navy clung to outdated, overly cautious rules. He needed to find someone willing to listen, someone with the authority and vision to see beyond the rulebook. The calculated risk, going over heads. Ignoring his immediate superior's command, the mechanic took a calculated risk. He requested a meeting with Captain Frederick Trapnell, the senior test pilot at the Naval Air Station, a legendary figure in naval aviation, renowned for his exceptional flying skills and his absolute intolerance for nonsense. Trapnell agreed to a 15-minute meeting on October 28, 1943. The mechanic walked into Trapnell's office, his notebook clutched in his hand, a desperate pitch forming on his lips. He explained his forbidden technique, presented his data, and passionately made his case. Trapnell listened, a sphinx-like expression on his face, offering no interruption. When the mechanic finally finished, Trapnell asked just one question: How many times have you done this? 7 flights, sir. A total of 4 hours at auto-rich mixture. Shrapnel rose from his desk and walked to the window. For a tense 30 seconds, silence hung heavy in the air. Then he turned. His words were simple, direct, and freighted with immense consequence. "Show me." The skeptic convinced. The demonstration flight. On November 2, 1943, the mechanic and Captain Shrapnel flew 2 Hellcats in formation. The mechanic employed his auto-rich technique, pushing his engine beyond its prescribed limits. Shrapnel, ever the stickler for protocol, flew by the book, using the standard auto-lean mixture. Starting at 5,000 feet, they initiated a maximum power climb. Within 20 seconds, the mechanic's aircraft was visibly pulling ahead, leaving a widening gap between them. By the time they reached 15,000 feet, the mechanic was a staggering 2,000 feet higher than Shrapnel. The difference was not just noticeable, it was overwhelming. This wasn't a marginal improvement, it was a paradigm shift. After landing, Shrapnel personally inspected the mechanic's engine. He found no damage, no signs of undue stress. He reviewed the fuel consumption data. Yes, the technique burned more fuel, but not prohibitively so. A Hellcat could still complete a combat mission and return to the carrier. Shrapnel made his decision. "We're taking this to Washington." The battle for acceptance had just escalated dramatically. Beyond the ivory tower, where true innovation resides. The story of the mechanic isn't just a testament to one man's ingenuity, it's a powerful and universal lesson about the nature of expertise and the often overlooked sources of groundbreaking innovation. In a world that often places immense value on credentials, degrees, and academic pedigree, this narrative reminds us that profound insights frequently emerge from individuals who possess a different kind of wisdom, the hands-on, intuitive understanding gained from years of direct experience. The mechanic held no advanced degrees. He wasn't a theoretical physicist or a celebrated aeronautical engineer. His education came from the grease and grit of a garage floor, from the intimate act of listening to troubled engines and coaxing life back into inert metal. This practical, experiential knowledge gave him a unique perspective. While engineers might understand the mathematical models and thermodynamic equations, he understood how the engine felt when it was pushed, how it sounded when it was stressed, and what its true, unspoken limits might be. He wasn't constrained by textbooks. He was guided by a profound, almost symbiotic relationship with machinery. The ground-level perspective: operators versus designers. This distinction between the designer and the operator is critical. Designers create based on specifications, calculations, and controlled test environments. Operators, especially those in high-stakes situations like combat, experience the machine in dynamic, unpredictable, and often extreme conditions. They learn its nuances, its quirks, its hidden capabilities, and its breaking points in ways that no design schematic can fully capture. The mechanic embodied this ground-level perspective. He wasn't just flying the Hellcat. He was feeling it, listening to it, interacting with it on a visceral level. That momentary surge of power, dismissed by others as a fluke, registered with him because his feel for engines told him it was something more. It was a hint, a possibility, a latent potential that the designers, operating within their conservative parameters and liability concerns, had simply never explored. The courage to be wrong. Perhaps the most potent aspect of the mechanic's genius was not just his insight, but his extraordinary courage. This wasn't the courage of a fighter pilot in a dogfight, though he possessed that too. This was the intellectual and moral courage to stand alone against an entire institution. He risked his career, his reputation, and potentially even court-martial to test an idea that everyone else, from his commanding officer to the manufacturer's top engineers, vehemently declared illegal, reckless, and impossible. To challenge a consensus so deeply entrenched, to defy manuals written by experts, requires an almost revolutionary mindset. It means accepting the very real possibility of being utterly wrong, of public humiliation, and of severe professional consequences. Yet he persisted, driven by a quiet but unshakable conviction that lives were being lost unnecessarily. This profound sense of responsibility, coupled with his intuitive understanding, propelled him forward where others would have retreated. The impossible is just untried. Ultimately, the mechanic's story dismantles the notion that impossible is an absolute state. Instead, it suggests that impossible is often just a label we affix to things we haven't yet dared to try, things that challenge our existing frameworks, or things that demand a level of courage to pursue. His breakthrough wasn't about inventing a new engine. It was about reimagining the operating parameters of an existing one. It was about recognizing latent potential hidden in plain sight, constrained not by physics but by conventional wisdom and the fear of stepping outside the lines. This lesson resonates far beyond the cockpit of a World War II fighter. It's a call to question assumptions, to trust intuition when it whispers against the din of established facts, and to possess the fortitude to test those whispers, even when the chorus of experts insists you're wrong. True genius, this story powerfully illustrates, isn't always found in academic halls or prestigious titles. It often resides in the unassuming individual with dirty hands, a sharp mind, and the audacious courage to defy the impossible. The crucible of command. The room erupts. On November 18, 1943, the mechanic and Captain Trapnell stood before a conference room packed with Navy brass and Pratt & Whitney engineers at the Bureau of Aeronautics in Washington, D.C. The chief of the Bureau's planning division, a high-ranking strategist, chaired the tense meeting. 15 officers and engineers crowded the room, their faces a mix of skepticism and impatience. The mechanic began to present his carefully assembled data. Before he could even finish, a Pratt & Whitney engineer erupted, his voice thick with indignation. "This is reckless and dangerous. You're describing a procedure that will destroy engines in combat. Cylinder head temperatures will spike, detonation will occur, pilots will suffer catastrophic engine failures over enemy territory." Another engineer piled on. "We've spent years developing these operating procedures. They're based on extensive testing. You can't just ignore them because you think you know better." The room descended into chaos. Half the officers were shouting, their faces red with anger. The engineers were adamant, their voices rising in unison, asserting that this violated every principle of engine management they knew. The mechanic's original commanding officer, present in the room, looked on, his face a mixture of vindication and suppressed rage, ready to demand disciplinary action for the unauthorized tests. The maverick leaders stand. We're at war. The high-ranking strategist, a distinguished veteran of naval aviation, a man known for his aggressive tactics, calmly raised his hand. The room fell silent. He fixed his gaze on the Pratt & Whitney engineers. "How many of you have flown combat missions in the Pacific?" Silence. Not a single hand was raised. He then turned to the mechanic. "Lieutenant, how confident are you that this technique won't cause engine failures in combat?" "Sir, I've tested it extensively. The R-2800 can handle it. The cooling system is overbuilt. The technique works." The mechanic's voice, though quiet, was firm with conviction. The strategist then looked at Captain Trapnell. "Captain, your assessment." "Sir, I've flown it myself. It works. The climb rate improvement is dramatic. If we implement this fleet-wide, our pilots will have a significant advantage in the first critical seconds of every dogfight." The high-ranking strategist made his decision. His voice resonated with authority, cutting through all the dissent and bureaucratic inertia. "Gentlemen, we're at war. We're losing pilots. Lieutenant Blackburn has discovered something that could save lives. I don't care if it violates peacetime procedures. We're going to test this in combat conditions. Captain Trapnell, prepare a training program. Pratt and Whitney, you'll monitor engine reliability. If engines start failing, we'll stop. But we're trying this." The room erupted again, but this time the strategist's decision was final. The unthinkable was now official policy. The secret training, turning skeptics into believers. In December 1943, the Navy established a classified training program at the Naval Air Station. 12 seasoned Hellcat pilots, rotated back from the Pacific combat zones, attended a 3-day course. The mechanic and Captain Trapnell personally taught them the auto-rich technique, carefully explaining when to use it and how to monitor their engine instruments. The pilots, having spent years being taught that this very procedure was dangerous and forbidden, were deeply skeptical. Among the trainees was a decorated Medal of Honor recipient and combat instructor, a true legend of the air. After his first training flight utilizing the mechanics technique, he landed, his eyes wide with revelation. He told the mechanic, "I just out-climbed every enemy pilot's nightmare scenario. This is going to change everything." The combat veterans, once skeptics, were now believers. By January 1944, the technique received approval for limited combat trials. 3 squadrons in the Pacific were authorized to use auto-rich mixture during combat climbs. Their engine maintenance crews were instructed to meticulously monitor for any signs of increased wear or failure. The data collection began, marking the true test of the mechanic's radical insight. The baptism of fire, the first combat test. On January 29, 1944, a skilled pilot, already an ace with 10 confirmed kills, found himself flying over an enemy stronghold. He had never before possessed a climb rate advantage. As 6 enemy fighters dove to attack his formation, the pilot, with a newfound confidence, shoved his mixture control to auto-rich and pulled into a maximum power climb. His Hellcat surged upward with astonishing force. Within 30 seconds, he was above the enemy fighters instead of below them. The enemy pilots, accustomed to American aircraft struggling in the climb, were caught utterly off guard. The American pilot rolled inverted and dove onto the lead enemy fighter, his machine guns shredding the lightweight aircraft. He pulled through, zoomed back up using his excess speed, and caught a second enemy pilot desperately trying to climb away. Another burst, another kill. Within 90 seconds, the pilot had shot down 3 enemy fighters. The remaining 3 broke off and fled, utterly disoriented by this unexpected turn of events. His wingman, still using standard mixture settings, struggled to keep up and scored no kills. After landing, the pilot was ecstatic. "I've never had that kind of climb performance. The enemy couldn't believe it. I was above them before they knew what happened." The data flood. Numbers don't lie. Over the next 3 months, the 3 test squadrons compiled statistics that were nothing short of stunning. Pilots employing the auto-rich technique consistently achieved climb rates averaging 3,800 feet per minute below 10,000 feet, a full 400 feet per minute faster than standard procedures. That 400-foot advantage translated to being 200 feet higher after just 30 seconds of climbing. In a dogfight, 200 feet of altitude is the critical difference between firing and being fired upon. More importantly, kill ratios skyrocketed. One squadron achieved a breathtaking 13.5 to 1 kill ratio in January and February 1944, compared to the fleet average of 6.5 to 1. Another recorded 14.1 to 1. A third achieved 12.8 to 1. The squadrons using the mechanics' radical technique were annihilating enemy aircraft at twice the rate of conventional squadrons, and, crucially, they were losing significantly fewer pilots. In 3 months of intense combat, these 3 test squadrons lost only 4 Hellcats in air-to-air engagements while shooting down 147 enemy aircraft. The engine reliability data was equally compelling. Despite the dire predictions of the engineers, engine failure rates in the test squadrons were actually slightly lower than the fleet average. The auto-rich mixture, as the mechanic had intuitively theorized, kept cylinders cooler during maximum power climbs, actually reducing thermal stress. Spark plug fouling increased slightly, requiring more frequent changes, but this was a minor maintenance issue, a negligible trade-off for a decisive combat advantage. Pratt & Whitney's engineers were finally forced to admit they were wrong. The enemy's astonishment. A terrifying shift. After the war, captured enemy pilots provided their chilling perspective on this sudden, inexplicable shift in American air superiority. A legendary enemy ace with 64 kills to his name described encountering Hellcats using the new technique in March 1944. The American fighters suddenly climbed like rockets. We could not believe it. For 2 years, we had the advantage in climb rate. Now they climbed faster than Zeros. It was terrifying. We could no longer count on escaping by climbing away. The Americans could follow us anywhere. Another enemy pilot recalled, in early 1944, something changed. The Grumman fighters became much more dangerous. They would zoom up to our altitude in seconds. We lost many experienced pilots who tried to climb away and were caught from below. It destroyed our confidence. The mechanic's quiet defiance had not only saved American lives, it had fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of aerial combat for the enemy. Fleet-wide triumph, dominating the skies. On April 15, 1944, the Navy issued a fleet-wide bulletin formally authorizing all Hellcat pilots to use auto-rich mixture during combat climbs. The bulletin included specific procedures meticulously developed by the mechanic and Captain Trapnell. Within weeks, every Hellcat squadron in the Pacific was employing the technique. The results were immediate and dramatic. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, an engagement famously dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, U.S. Navy fighters annihilated 476 enemy aircraft while losing only 23 of their own. The kill ratio was an astounding 20.7 to 1. While multiple factors contributed to this monumental victory, post-battle analysis unequivocally credited the improved climb performance as a significant tactical advantage. American pilots consistently achieved superior positioning in the first 30 seconds of combat, allowing them to dictate the terms of every engagement, turning defense into offense with ruthless efficiency. The Navy's top ace, with 34 kills, later wrote, "The auto-rich technique gave us a decisive edge. We could outclimb anything the Japanese had. It turned the Hellcat from a good fighter into a great one." The immeasurable impact. Lives saved. By war's end, statistical analysis vividly illustrated the technique's profound impact. From April 1944 through August 1945, Hellcat squadrons achieved an overall kill ratio of 19 to 1 against enemy aircraft, a staggering improvement from the 6.5 to 1 ratio in the war's first 2 years. The Navy estimated that approximately 800 American pilots survived combat situations they would have undoubtedly lost using conventional procedures. Think about that for a moment. 800 young men, 800 sons, husbands, fathers, brothers, who returned home to their families instead of becoming another statistic lost in the vastness of the Pacific. 800 futures that were allowed to unfold because one man, with an intuitive mind and an indomitable will, dared to challenge the impossible. The unsung hero, a life of quiet humility. When the war finally ended in August 1945, the Navy had produced over 12,000 Hellcats. Every single one flew with operating procedures fundamentally influenced by the mechanic's discovery. The technique was formally incorporated into the F-6F flight manual. In September 1945, Pratt & Whitney, the very manufacturer whose engineers had initially dismissed him, revised its R2800 operating specifications, formally acknowledging that auto-rich mixture could be safely used for extended combat periods. The company's engineers, initially hostile to his radical idea, ultimately conceded that this unassuming mechanic understood their engine better than they did. In November 1945, the mechanic received the Distinguished Flying Cross for his extraordinary contribution to the war effort. The citation commended his innovative approach to fighter tactics and engine management, crediting him with significant improvements to combat effectiveness, directly contributing to the air superiority achieved by United States naval forces in the Pacific theater. A venerable admiral, a giant of naval history, personally presented the medal, declaring, "Lieutenant Blackburn exemplifies the American spirit of innovation. He saw a problem, refused to accept conventional wisdom, and found a solution that saved countless lives. The Navy is grateful for his courage and ingenuity." Years later, he received a letter that he would cherish more than any medal. It was from the pilot who first used his technique in combat, the ace who shot down 3 enemy fighters in 90 seconds. The letter read, "Tom, I'm writing to thank you for something you'll never fully understand. Because of your discovery, I survived situations where I should have died. I outclimbed zeros that would have killed me. I came home to my wife and daughter. Hundreds of other pilots came home too. You gave us an edge when we needed it most. I will never forget what you did for us." This letter, he would say in rare interviews decades later, meant more to him than any official recognition. After the war, the mechanic quietly left the Navy. He transitioned to a career as a commercial pilot, flying passengers for a major airline. He never sought the spotlight for his wartime contributions. When aviation historians discovered his pivotal role in the 1960s and sought interviews, he was invariably reluctant. "I just did my job," he would tell them with humble sincerity. "A lot of guys did a lot more than I did." He refused to attend reunions or speak at aviation conferences, insisting he was no hero, just a mechanic who got lucky. His profound humility often frustrated historians who recognized the monumental significance of his actions. One researcher aptly noted in 1972, "Thomas Blackburn may have saved more American lives than any other individual test pilot in World War II, yet he remains virtually unknown. His discovery gave the Navy a decisive tactical advantage at a critical moment in the Pacific War. He deserves recognition alongside the great aviation innovators of his era." The enduring legacy. Lessons for today. Today, the mechanic's fundamental principle lives on in modern fighter tactics. The concept of optimizing engine performance for specific combat situations, even if it means momentarily exceeding peacetime operating limits, is standard doctrine in every air force across the globe. Modern fighters, from the cutting-edge F-35 Lightning II, utilize sophisticated computer-controlled fuel management systems that are direct descendants of the foundational understanding that combat engines can be pushed beyond conservative peacetime specifications. The Navy's elite fighter weapons school, famously known as Top Gun, teaches the mechanic's story as a prime example of innovative thinking in combat. Instructors emphasize that sometimes the most crucial breakthroughs don't come from the highly credentialed engineers in their sterile labs, but from the operators in the field, from those who intimately understand the machines at a visceral level. His story is a powerful testament to a universal truth. Expertise isn't solely found in diplomas or titles. Sometimes the person who solves an impossible problem is the mechanic, the operator, the individual who understands machines at an intuitive depth, who sees possibilities that the experts miss, and who possesses the courage to challenge conventional wisdom, even when every authority figure says they're wrong. Thomas Blackburn passed away in 1998 at the age of 79. His obituary mentioned his career as an airline pilot, but said nothing of his profound impact on the Pacific Air War. Few people at his funeral knew the quiet man they mourned had changed the course of history and saved thousands of lives. He wanted it that way. But his story endures. It's a beacon for anyone who has ever faced an insurmountable obstacle. It reminds us that sometimes the solution is hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to test it. It reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected places, from people without impressive credentials, but with the courage to question authority and the persistence to prove their convictions. The next time you encounter an impossible problem, remember the mechanic. Remember that the greatest innovations in history often begin with someone saying, "That's impossible," and one person replying, "Let me show you." If you're fascinated by these untold stories of innovation, resilience, and the mavericks who changed the course of history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We dive deep into the unsung heroes and revolutionary moments that shaped our world. And if you found inspiration in this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to redefine what's possible.